Okay.
Константин Витальевич, мы в эфире. Можем начинать.
Okay, we can get started.
Здравствуйте, уважаемые гости, здравствуйте, уважаемые эксперты.
Dear participants, dear experts, I'm happy to welcome all of you at another meeting of Arctic Sessions. Today we'll talk about indigenous peoples. My name is Konstantin. I'm Executive Director of PORA. I know many of you and many of you know me. We have met more than once, sometimes in the Arctic. So to get the ball rolling, let me introduce our speakers.
Значит, участие в круглом столе сегодняшнем принимают.
So we are joined by Antonina Gorbunova, and I apologize for these technical difficulties. I have known Ms. Gorbunova for a very long time. We have met in the Arctic. We know each other very well. We also have Sofya Unruh. Oh, I forgot to give all the titles for Ms. Gorbunova. Member of the UN Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Executive Director of the Interregional Public Organization, the Union of Indigenous Peoples. Then we have Sofya Unruh, Acting Deputy Director for Regional Public Affairs, Director of the Institute of the Peoples of the North. Mr. Stotsky asked me to say hi to you, Ms. Unruh. He's very encouraged by his communications with you, very optimistic. Anyway, he asked me to say hi to you. Then we have Mikhail Pogodaev, Deputy Minister for Arctic Development and Northern Affairs of the Republic of Sakha, Yakutia, Special Representative of the Russian Chairmanship in the Arctic Council on Indigenous Peoples. Mr. Pogodaev, we know that Yakutia has often been at the forefront in many, many matters, including working with the small indigenous peoples. And just a second here. We have Edman Nerkagi. Did I get your name right? I'm sorry. I was so worried that I would mispronounce your name. Vice President of the Yamal to its Descendants Indigenous Organization. I also know Yamal very well. I've been there a number of times. I really enjoy Yamal. It's a very good territory, and it's been a pioneer in many respects, including indigenous peoples. So we would like to discuss the following subjects today. We have to make some adjustments to our plans because of a lot of things that is happening these days, but preserving the culture of small indigenous peoples is one of the few areas where we can continue cooperating. This is why Arctic territories are so special. They're so small, and we have such systems there that any violation, any upsetting the fragile balance can have serious consequences. So it's really important to preserve everything we have built over decades. So let me lay down some rules. We have 90 minutes for our meeting. First, I will let all the speakers say a few words, and then toward the end, we'll have a Q&A session. Can you hear me? I will try to fix my camera. What? Yes, we can hear you. All right, let's get started. We'll start with Ms. Gorbunova. So please correct me if I got something wrong, but I think Ms. Gorbunova wanted to say something about the rights and interests of small indigenous peoples in the context of industrial development. Okay, I hope you can all hear me well. Okay, I'm very happy to see all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me to join this discussion. I want to talk about interacting with industrial projects because we have some territories present here today that actually have been quite successful in supporting small indigenous peoples. I think this support should come in the form of ensuring the rights of small indigenous peoples that the Russian Constitution guarantees. And today we see some new trends, and this is reflected in some of the events we had. For example, we had a special platform at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum on the culture of small indigenous peoples. Then we also had a special pavilion at the Eastern Economic Forum. We had a few discussions there. There was a panel discussion with high-level participants. And just recently, we had a large conference in Murmansk, where we talked about interaction between business, the government, and small indigenous peoples. And what I would like to do today is I want to have a discussion about the direction we are taking. What are the problems we face today? And I would like us to consider a few recent cases as regards ensuring the rights of small indigenous peoples in the context of industrial projects. For example, we have what is known as ethnological study review. It's a controversial mechanism. This is not a government mechanism. These are publicly organized events. We had a few studies like that in Yamal. It is done by researchers, by scientists, and I think we could differentiate what we did in Yamal, and then there is another territory where ethnological review is mandatory. It's incorporated into local laws. In Yakutia, this law has been in place for over 10 years, and this mechanism works quite effectively. But even there, we think it can be taken further. For example, the current law does not allow revoking a license if the company failed the ethnological study. I think there was a meeting between the governor and local businesses recently. So I hope that the situation with ethnological review can be improved. And when licenses are issued, I think this ethnological provisions should be incorporated into the terms of the license. How and when this ethnological study has to be done before a company launches its industrial project. They have to check whether this territory is being used by small indigenous peoples for herding cattle or for some other purposes. On the one hand, there is a certain degree of flexibility, and each territory can set its own rules. There are 29 different territories, and the situation is very different in all of them. So I think it would be wrong to have a single one-size-fits-all federal standard to define interaction between industrial companies and small indigenous peoples. So it's nice to have flexibility, but still, we think there should be a federal law or a federal rule, a federal regulation, which would say that if a company's industrial activities interfere with the traditional way of life of small indigenous peoples, their license can be revoked. Then there is one more point I would like to bring up. There is this principle of informed consent. And we have a very good example of that in Yamal. This was in 2018. We had Yana Dordina giving a report on this very interesting case, very interesting situation. International standards upheld at the highest level turned out to be very applicable on the ground in our specific situation. Standards are standards, of course, but we should always remember what our goal is. What is the ultimate goal of the industrial standards that companies have to follow? We have to minimize their impact, and this requires dialogue. We should have such a goal. We may not have it at this point, but we should make it our goal and pursue it. We should have a dialogue. We should have direct consultations. We need to inform people in advance. And we need all these tools, all these instruments that would help us build trust. I have mentioned the case of post-Hardy a few times, so I don't want to repeat all this information one more time. There is a special website. I can maybe answer some of your questions later. In conclusion, I would like to say a few words about support. We adopted a new program for supporting traditional activities and crafts of small indigenous people a few years back. We also introduced new standards for corporate social responsibility. These new rules were adopted through the lobbying of Sakha Yakutia and the leaders of Sakha Yakutia.
Regarding the support program, number of regions ask for our consultation, and they'd like to incorporate into that program not just support measures for the Arctic zone of the Russian Federation and elsewhere. And speaking in my personal capacity, I must say that probably we have approached the stage when this program has to be evaluated. We have to do a kind of a monitoring as to whether it attains the goals which were set beforehand, whether it is useful, whether it is helpful, and any support measures should focus not just on the goals, but we have to assess the efficiency of these measures. And I think that no one would argue against. I tried to be brief, and I hope that the discussion would be interesting. Thank you so much. Thank you, Antonina. And Lee, let me pick up the role of a moderator and say that I would like to pass the floor to follow that topic. We are done with the previous speaker, and I think that we will pass the floor to Yamal so that our colleague will tell us about the experience of the region, which sees a burgeoning industrial growth, but at the same time preserves representation from among the indigenous peoples. And Antonina also has referred to the forum that took place in Murmansk, and Yamal experience was presented fully. Edman, tell us, please, can you hear us well? Yes, I can hear you very well. Konstantin, thank you for performing my functions while I got disconnected. Thank you. But now you can see me. So there was some technical problems in my Moscow office, and after that, the camera stopped working. Edman, over to you then. Actually, the information shared by our colleague concerning the public hearings when developing certain territories, what is being done and what is being done at the level of the federal and local authorities, regional authorities. Certainly, everything is in compliance with the law. Every company that enters the territory has to follow certain rules. But certainly, this is due to the law. 3 voices would be enough to say yes. So once 3 voices say yes, that would be enough. And if others say, no, we do not want the company to come to the land, so it doesn't mean anything. So the public hearing has been done. So the box is checked right there. In that very place, we find a situation which means that whether we have public hearings or not, whether it is related to FPIC or not, whether we are being asked do we agree or we disagree. That doesn't matter. Every company that enters the territory has to hold a public hearing. And regardless of how many people gathered, for instance, Yamal is home to 500,000 people. How many of these people were asked? There are some nomadic people, and there are municipalities which are available and that say, okay, the company would have to tap your territory. But again, what has been done? It goes through a municipality, and the municipality may say that the public hearings have taken place, but whether the overall answer was negative or positive, it doesn't matter. So, according to the law, the very fact of holding public hearings matters, not so much the negative or positive outcome. Then any company which comes to the territory, and at the Yamal region, we have the following practice. An agreement would be signed with the municipality to compensate for certain damage inflicted. But again, how do you assess that damage? You built a gas pipeline, for instance, today, and that's very good, and everything is clean, environmentally friendly, but today we cannot look into the future. What may happen then? And we are discussing that with Ust-Kamensk. And again, the pipeline goes from one bank to the other bank under the ground. So that's Yamal. But at the same time, we understand that once this pipeline is built and the people around say that there is no young fish, so there will be no fishing there next to that pipeline. And this pipeline would go to Novosibirsk. That's a big question. And any enterprise that says that, for instance, we are going to breed 3 million young fish every year, so it doesn't matter because young fish is not so important in that respect. Then a few words about the ethnological expert review. That review is about assessing the impact of oil and gas projects. How is it going to impact the people who are nomadic now? A pipeline is being built, and we said more than once about that. So a pipeline is being built, and how reindeer is supposed to cross that pipeline, jump over it. Or for instance, it gives birth to the cubs, and then our farmers have to think about how to make these reindeer migrate to avoid major losses. Back in the year 2007, we checked the health of reindeer. Reindeer, this is our food as well. So we did a checkup, we checked the liver of our reindeer, and it turned out that the reindeer liver contains a lot of mercury because of Gazprom, probably. Reindeer liver contains a lot of iron because we are eating reindeer meat a fresh way, non-cooked way, according to our tradition. In another situation, again, there was quite an interesting conversation. What we want from the ethnological expertise or expert review. All the problems that are related to tapping this or that region have to follow certain rationale. Let's have a look at how the life has changed. So if the reindeer farmers feel well, that's great. But apart from that, we have fishers and fishers who are living in the villages or in the settlements who have no other jobs. And there are poachers. That's another issue, which is typical of many constituted members of the Russian Federation. So, for instance, these are people who are forced to become poachers because they have to catch fish in order to meet both ends meet, to make both ends meet. When we start discussing these things, we would come up to a wait-and-see approach. We are told, okay, we will resolve that a bit later, and usually this is the answer which is provided by the officials. Regarding our dealing with the oil and gas industry, we do have public hearings. But why actually we have to quarrel with the people? Why do we have to have disputes? So, for instance, a company would come and would say that we need that land plot, and we do not say no. We say that, for instance, in exchange for that land plot, we need this, this, and this. And assumingly, the companies would grant us something, but not to the extent we need. And everyone is familiar with Google, for instance. If you look at the compensation rate of Miller, who is head of Gazprom, do you remember Norilsk case? 250,000 rubles were granted to the people, one-off payment to the tune of 250,000 rubles, and it would last them only 6 months. Originally, there has to be a program at the level of the regional budget and municipal budget, so that we would understand why this is being done. And in serious, I'm telling you, there are more than 100 laws and bylaws adopted. But all of a sudden, the schools are being built for the sake of the indigenous peoples. I mean, not for the sake of the indigenous peoples, but for all the citizens and residents of Yamal Peninsula. 40% are represented by other nationalities. We're not against that. But when we're told, for instance, that a school is built for the indigenous people, so it means that it is being done at the expense of the federal budget. And that means that this is the federal budget that earmarks money for the sake of the indigenous peoples to build a school, but this school is for everyone, not just for indigenous peoples. Then who we are and why we're there? Probably we are to set up some single structure. Yakutia finds itself in a very good position because it is one step ahead of us, but their territory is much bigger. So who we are in that respect and why we're doing that? Why we are doing ethnological expert review? We'd like to find out to what extent development and tapping of the forest impacts fishing, for instance. We know that, but really we cannot support that with the statistics. But how these projects are impacting the livelihoods of people. Again, all the problems related to the indigenous peoples are done in groupings. For instance, starting from the birth of a child until the end of the school, this is an assembly, a panoply of all the problems. And when you realize that, for instance, when we look at the school leavers and what universities they have to enter, and for instance, they're not ready for the academic education, for the higher education. This is again what has to be studied within the ethnographic expert review. Antonina, if we are to work together, then it means that We have to incorporate all those components into our studies, into our analysis. These are these delicate things that sometimes we overlook. We have necessary budget earmarked for everything, so certain funds are being provided for the would-be students, and some fellowships are being paid, and that's great. So we support IT specialists and animal experts, everyone. But on the other hand, it has to be incorporated into our ethnographic expert review. How do we make sure that the puzzle makes up? For instance, a company comes to us and we then make a list of a kind of an algorithm. We would say that you do your job, and we understand that we're living in the Russian Federation, so you do your job. And we need this, and this. For instance, we have to have children to provide our families with everything necessary. And there are perennial reindeer farmers and there are private reindeer farmers. And for instance, we make an affirmative decision that, okay, let's develop that territory. And that would be a great surprise for those private farmers. So let's discuss that during Q&A session. I'm ready to share my viewpoints, but let us exchange letters. Ms. Gorbunova scratch the surface of that, but I'd rather go into more details before we take a decision concerning the ethnological expert review. This issue is being discussed at the level of the federal authorities, and remember these expert reviews, and remember how much money we paid for that. And ethnological expert review should be independent from the budget. So any budget should incorporate that expert review. When we start asking who is going to pay for that, usually the outcome of the expert review would depend on those who pay the money. Not always, again, 100% of the people would be involved in these expert reviews. Tazov region, for instance, now is being developed, meaning that some projects are being implemented there. And people are going across the tundra, pulling the people, and this is done a very good way. And sometimes we get a response from them, from our nomads. They say, what I'm going to do once this project is being implemented, and it means that I will have to move this way. For instance, if one farm is moved 20 to 30 kilometers away from here, that would be ruining their traditions and rights because they were staying there for years, even for centuries. And Mikhail probably will tell you more on what it means to breed reindeer. And that a couple of kilometers away from certain territory may affect the nomads and the reindeer population. I'm done, and probably I will leave more time for Q&A. Thank you. Thank you so much, Edman. Thank you for your opinion. And we know first-handed what is going on in the local settlements. And me, Antonina, we took part in such a pool. I do think that what is important is to have independent observers. You say that those who are paying the money would impact the outcomes of the public opinion polls. But all these things being considered, it's very important to embrace most interested parties, and this is why we went to the settlements. And Antonina probably will tell more about that. But the very essence of that was that it concerned only the residents of that settlement. Let me interrupt you. I will interrupt you. By the way, back in 2007, 2008, and 2009, actually, we planned for a very good questionnaire. We made it, but it turned out that this is the institute which has to make that questionnaire. So it means that there has to be an official institute. For instance, if the living standards are going down, then we would make a kind of a questionnaire. We do that, and as a result, what we have collected as a non-profit or civil society organization, once we propose that for the consideration of some governmental agency, they say, why you're doing that? Because there has to be a specialized institute which has to do that. And certainly we could engage them. And the people who are moving around doing polling have a totally different approach to that. Unlike us, for instance, when we as an association are talking to the nomadic people, we immediately would see that this or that person has chopped woods or not have chopped woods.
So we start comparing. People are very frank when they talk to us, but when they have some researchers visiting, they talk in a totally different way to them. That's why the information that researchers obtain is sometimes inaccurate. It's always different when you have people coming from a different place, and people tend to, show them the nice facade, but they don't let them see what's inside, what the actual situation is. For example, I really like what they do in the Nenets district. They were able to protect the reindeer herders. Actually, this is a very complex matter. Let's say I have no relatives and I have 1,000 deer. Who will inherit all those deer? I understand that you're really concerned about this subject. So as moderator, let's save it until later. We may come back to this discussion. Ms. Unruh, I think you're ready. You wanted to talk about national education policy. So please, the floor is yours. And I've got 15 minutes, right? It's up to you. Just keep on talking until we stop you. All right, this is a slightly different format from what I expected. So very briefly, I will go through my deck of slides. Can you see my slides? Yes, I can see everything fine. Okay, very briefly, I would like to say that our institute works based on the Russia's national policy. Our educational programs help people learn their native languages and at the same time study the Russian language. We have a bachelor's program so that our graduates can find a good job. because sometimes it's hard to get a job as a teacher of an indigenous language. So they will also have a job as a Russian teacher. We have 4 departments at our institution. We work with the Linguistic Studies Institute and some other Russian institutes. Also, we help with promoting education among nomadic peoples. We have a special contract with Yamal, training teachers for their schools. These are some numbers regarding our students. We have 231 students, 186 in bachelor's programs, and they represent 20 ethnic minorities. Some of the students study based on a special contract that we sign with their territories. Also, we have quotas reserved for small indigenous peoples. This is done by the Ministry of Higher Education. So we identify potential students, arrange quotas for them, and send out invitations to produce personnel specialists. There are not too many universities that do this kind of work. There are some in Buryatia, in Petrozavodsk, but St. Petersburg is the only city where you have 25 indigenous languages. And we stay in touch with our alumni. We help them find a job, and they move to Arctic territories. They get a job there. We have a special alum club, where we keep track of all of our graduates. We also have a research program based on government grants and grants from RNF and the Potanin Foundation. All these studies have to do with the Arctic monitoring technology, teaching methods for indigenous peoples, special projects to put together corpuses for various languages, like Khanty, for example, where we pull together all the texts available in this language. We also have partnership with 6 colleges in various territories. Lavozero Reindeer College. There is the Yakutia Arctic College for indigenous peoples. So we shared some of our programs with them. We know there was this tragic situation in Yamal where 2 college students committed suicide. Well, one survived. So we have a number of projects, for example, supporting, providing psychological support and therapy for indigenous students. Also, we publish textbooks. For example, we recently published 6 new textbooks on indigenous languages, Dolga language, and others. We always stay in touch with the territories. Also, we have some extracurricular activities. We have a friendship project. Our students take part in various contests, win grants. For example, we did a project with the Rosmolodezh. We got a grant for an expedition to 3 remote territories. And we are partners in this project. Also, this slide shows our interaction with various regions. We work with 28 different territories, 28 different provinces of Russia. And every year we reach out to them and encourage them to send students to our university. And we provide courses in all these languages for the students they send. These are normally ministries of education, special departments for indigenous peoples. Then we have a few partnership agreements with various universities and colleges. Also, we have joint programs with certain high schools. Every year we have 54 to 55 different agreements with various educational facilities on joint education programs. Also, we offer advanced training programs for teachers, for professors. For example, we are currently running a program like that with Naryanmar, with Yamal. We offer advanced training to their professors, to their teachers. They already have a diploma as a teacher, so they don't need to go through the entire training at our university. We just offer an advanced course in addition to the diploma they already have. Okay, general education. Our professors often offer consultations for high school teachers. We will soon have a special contest for Nenets, Chikotka, and the Vienna language. Will soon circulate a letter of notice, and we'll have this contest pretty soon. Also, local authorities help our alumni find a job in their territory. And we also prepare some additional study materials, and we organize extracurricular events. There are dictation contests for Khanty and Mansi languages. So this is the advanced training courses that we have done so far. So now let me say a few words about the challenges that we face. First of all, personnel and continuity, because many of our professors are pretty advanced in years. And as you might know, we have a rule, a regulation offering housing to the professors who teach indigenous people's languages. But then this regulation was forgotten, and currently younger people, younger professors, they don't get free housing. In some cases, we are able to resolve this problem, but there is still some shortage of personnel. We do have 5 young teachers of Khanty language, Valeria Varenkova. No, what's her name? She teaches the Nenets language instead of Ms. Barmich. We also have a young teacher for the Munsi language, but we are always concerned about our staff. We always watch out. Who else can we invite to teach at our school? We also want to add more languages. For example, we brought in a teacher for the Tafalar language this year and some other Kesset language. And we just recently got in touch with a professor who can teach the shore language, because we do have some shores. Next. We are often accused with our regarding our enrollment procedures. We have what we call targeted enrollment. Soon we'll have a special meeting where we are going to explain our position on this issue. We had to explain to the government how this works. We often have a problem. Potential freshmen often don't have a proper basic education, and there is a problem with that. There's a problem with enrollment. They don't have a sufficient education to enroll. So a way to solve this problem would be to set up a prep school. So people would attend a prep course before they before they enter our university. But when people come from northern territories, they need to adapt. They need some help learning Russian, adapting to the university environment. This used to be the problem. These days, it's no longer that big of an issue because young people coming are pretty urban. But the problem is we have the standardized test now, and quite often the applicants are unable to pass this test and get a sufficiently high grade to qualify. So we are currently thinking about making a special preparation course. You can do this remotely, but it's not that convenient at times because of time zone difference. You can have people from Chukotka, from other places, and it's makes things very complicated. It's hard for our professors to find the right time slots for these classes, and then students, they live in different time zones, so it's hard to find a time that would be convenient for everybody. And there are provinces, there are territories that are reluctant to use this quota system to send their applicants, send their young people to our school. Sometimes local officials are just reluctant to get involved. Sometimes we just ask them to fill out a form, but they have a lot of questions. Who's going to pay for the contract? Who's going to cover their expenses? What if they never come back? They go to St. Petersburg and stay there, and they come up with all sorts of excuses. We tell them, okay, we have these young people here, they're eager to learn, they want to come, and we want to receive them. So sometimes we have to get some NGOs involved, like we had to ask Alexa Lemonzo to help us in some cases. And then in other places like Yamal, there were other NGOs helping us with that. By the way, Yamal is not doing very well in this respect. A lot depends on the person. A lot depends on the personality of the local official. And the situation in Yakutia is also not that great. So we send out official letters inviting them to sign a contract. And they're not sure who should be arranging that, if it should be the ministry or the school. The ministry is reluctant to take care of that. They say the school should take care of that. The school says they don't have enough money.
Even if they wanted to that, they don't have budget in order to support these children. And again, still we're working with schools. The school education department said that this is not in their competence. There is instruction from president to instruct more in the native languages, but there are no mechanisms to support that. We keep enrolling children through any obstacles. That's a big problem, to find people with the necessary number of points, and then you make them sign an agreement. And Tatiana joined us, and she went to the settlement, and she took that Mansi child, and she was taken to that coal company, and an agreement was signed. But this is an MP who individually took that decision, not always that there is such an opportunity in the region. Really, I think that this has to be discussed at the level of the ministries. And again, some difficulties might be raised by the distribution of powers and authorities. There are quotas in terms of a number of seats at schools and universities. And this is not subordinated to the Department of Education. And if the unified state exam is not passed in April, for instance, and if a child is entitled to a quota, but the child has not passed the unified state exam, then the quota is no longer applicable. And the ministry would tell us that they cannot do anything about that. And it has to be brought to the level of the departments for school education. Who can do that? The Ministry of Education cannot do that. And they tell us, please turn to the Consumer Rights Protection Agency. I think that this problem could be addressed, but now we try to introduce the mother tongue exam in order to seed off those who are not entitled to be called indigenous people. Those who failed the exams to the philology department, then they would try to apply to the indigenous peoples of the north, and that would drive the points down. There are also graduates of St. Petersburg institutes which try to enter any university at all, and following a law, we cannot do anything with that, because any person may choose where to study. We can fight against that only by means of quotas or introducing the mother tongue exam, but I have some serious doubts that even indigenous peoples could pass such an exam. And at the same time, internet connection is sometimes very poor, and therefore we cannot do such exams online. This year, we were very anxious when our college graduates were about to take exams, and they had to be identified, and they had to take pictures from 5 angles. Once the internet connection is poor, the person would be somehow thrown out by the system. So these are the problems that we have. And at Chukotka, internet connection is non-existent at all. One lady, right on the flight from Chukotka to Moscow, landing in Moscow, had to upload those documents because in Chukotka you cannot upload so heavy, so big documents. Then there are problems related to the students' adaptation. For instance, this year, about 60 seats were allocated to the indigenous peoples, and only 25 of them opted for the Northern Territories or Northern Peoples Institute. The requirements were quite high. No one takes into consideration that these are the representatives of the indigenous peoples. And probably I'm behind the schedule. Let me tell you then that we have to upgrade our equipment, and we need to support the undergraduates. When I became student in 1995, we got enough subsidies and we could survive through perestroika and other years. In 2016, when subsidies were abolished, we no longer have so many students because not everyone could support the students living in a city. 2,700 rubles being paid as a fellowship is enough only to pay for the rent. We were equalized with orphans, and therefore we were entitled to such subsidies. So probably more subsidies could be paid to the regions. There are certain regional targeted fellowships. So in Yamal, too, people were entitled to such subsidies, to such fellowships. The same is true of Chukotka, but this is not applicable to everyone. You have to have A grades. It means that this is not a comprehensive system. And again, these are our partners. I will skip that slide. These are the ones who support us, the Indigenous Peoples of the North Foundation. We perform the instruction of the executive authorities, that's the roadmap. And again, we're being supported by the ministries, by the government, and I hope that the association would help us having necessary administrative resources, and probably therefore we could provide necessary funding for our students. The fellowship which was set up, it was set up by the Ministry for Education, and we are not subordinated to that ministry. We cannot claim that fellowship. And there are several such fellowships, and we have 200 students within our institute. Thank you so much for your attention. Sofya, thank you so much again for your contribution, because I believe that it's hard to overestimate the role of languages in preserving the ethnicities. And this is what we did. We have a second official language in office. That's the Eretsk one. When we started our engagement with Taimur indigenous peoples, we immediately realized that there are few people who master the spoken language and the written language. The erosion of language results in the erosion of the ethnicity. So this is the cause and effect thing. And I do think that very soon the Arctic Development Office would emerge in your region. Thank you so much. And so let us speed up. I pass the floor to Mikhail. Pogodaev, he'll speak about the public support to the traditional crafts in Sakha, Yakutia. Mr. Pogodaev, good afternoon. It's late at night, as far as I understand it. Yep, it is midnight. Okay, we are all ears. Thank you so much, Konstantin. I welcome everyone. I'm glad to see all of you. We are all familiar with each other, so let me speak up and tell you about the public support of the traditional crafts of the indigenous peoples. The topic at hand is dedicated to the support of the indigenous peoples. That topic is big. I can say a lot about that. And again, lots been said concerning the ethnological expert review and support on behalf of the companies and support of the languages. I have problems with camera. No, I can hear you very well. At least I can hear you very well. Please go on. This is for the second day that we have strong winds and internet connection is not stable. So internet connection is being blown away. I apologize in advance if I lose connection. And again, let me tell you that this topic is very broad. Therefore, I decided to tell you today. Antonina already told you about the support of the traditional economic activity of the indigenous peoples of the North. This program was adopted in 2001. Let me tell you about Yakutia, how this program is being implemented there, and what progress we have there, any advances that we have there. Let me share my screen. Can you see my presentation? Yes, I do. Yes, I do see your presentation. Thank you. As you know, Yakutia, that's a huge region, that's a multi-ethnic region. 129 ethnicities are living there. That's why our republic is unique, not only because of its nature, but because of its ethnic composition. The republic is unique, its climate is very diverse. There are lots of climate zones, and I can speak hours about every region, about every district. As concerns the indigenous minority peoples, we are home to 16% of the total indigenous peoples of the Far East and the North. According to the all-Russian census, we were home to 39,936 people. And today's census, well, actually, the census took place last year. This figure was not published, but I do believe that this figure would be bigger. As you know, the government of the Russian Federation instructed last year to adopt a program to support traditional crafts of the indigenous peoples in the Russian Federation. In the Arctic zone, it comprises of 6 main directions. Subsidies for 2022 amount to 20 million rubles. And this money was distributed between Sakha, Yakutia, Chukotsky Autonomous District and Nenets Autonomous District. And we submitted certain propositions to the federal government, and these propositions were supported and included into that program. End of last year, we signed an agreement with the Ministry for the Forest and Development and Sakha Yakutia government. And certain money was earmarked. We funded that from the federal budget. We co-funded that. And it should be noted that all in all, the traditional crafts are being supported by the regional budget. So reindeer farming alone, or husbandry alone, enjoys 100 million subsidies. We also support hunting, fishing farms. So it means that all the traditional crafts are being supported and subsidized. And besides that, as been said, we have enacted a regional act on ethnological expert review. We have accumulated certain experience of dealing with the industrial companies, which also are supportive of the traditional crafts of the indigenous peoples. We can treat differently the local experience. Certainly, we have certain achievements, we have certain failures or flaws, deficiencies, and what is related to the expert review law, but that's a process which is dynamic, which is going on. We are working all the time. We are interacting with the industrial companies, with the indigenous peoples communities, with the NGOs, and we try altogether to find a solution to the questions that may arise, the problems that pop up. We have litigations. We have positive examples. When the companies would work on certain territories, would be operational and would interact with the local communities, respecting each other. So it means that we have achieved certain results. There are negative things there as well. When, for instance, conflict situations may emerge. For instance, in terms of ethnological expert review, we sometimes would get negative outcomes or negative statements at the moment. There is a dispute over a negative final statement. A gold mining company started digging for gold next to the water springs. The local residents are very much against that, and the local government is against that. Took the side of the local people and the fool. We asked for the court remedy, but we do believe that this law on ethnological expert review, and as of today, we held about 50 such reviews. The losses estimated amount to 1,100,000,000 rubles, which have to be paid as a compensation to the local communities. This is done as a compensation for the damage inflicted. And on top of that, the company signs agreements on the social and economic development of the regions, of the municipalities, helps to develop a social infrastructure, to implement certain projects. And I can speak hours about that, so I diverted a little bit from that topic. Again, we have enacted a law on the nomadic schools. We have a network of nomadic schools. The kids from among the indigenous peoples study there. We are experimenting in the sense that we have mobile blocks. This is a kind of a portable school. And we run into the problem of sanitary and epidemiological data, then oversight, the Russian education oversight, etc. So there are certain claims raised by different agencies because of the conditions in which kids could be transported. This is not compliant with the federal standards. That's why we stand up for our position that in the context of Africa, it is not possible to implement all these standards. You have to bear in mind the specificity of the Arctic region. Sometimes it falls on the deaf ears, but until today, we still have some problems, certain issues. Therefore, the money that is being channeled to us from the federal budget is being used to address the problem of transport. And snowcats are being provided, and other pieces of equipment has been provided. But schools don't have that, so we have to address these problems separately and to provide that to schools. Again, we use that program in order to help reindeer farmers to build movable houses, build fences. This year, this federal money was used in order to buy drones for the reindeer farms. The same is true of providing renewable sources of energy to the reindeer farmers, everything they need in order to implement that program. So this year we already kick-started that. And before that, certain money was earmarked from the public coffers, but this was not substantial. Only a few companies would get such support. Thanks to that program, we could provide our reindeer farms with everything necessary. Then,
next, we have another section in this program. We're building trade and logistics hubs. In Arctic territories, these are usually the places where small indigenous peoples live. That's why we decided one of the biggest problems in the Arctic is providing people with groceries, with food. So we decided to address this matter in a systemic way. Fortunately, the federal government helped us, and we started building this network. So in other words, this is a systemic approach. For every Arctic territory, we are going to build a trade and logistics center that will bring in food, groceries for people living in this territory. Because of the transport problems, we have major issues with food insecurity. As you might know, sometimes it takes up to 2 years to deliver everything we need because it's a huge distance. You have to use various types of transport, and transport costs are huge. So by building centers like these, we'll be able to address this problem in a much better way, much more efficiently. We have Yakut in charge of basic goods, and we use a new model. However, the lack of infrastructure, storage spaces, warehouses, coolers, etc. Many of these things are lacking. That's why a decision was made to build this network of hubs in 13 different places. And this is now part of the Arctic Zone Development Program for the period until 2035. Sakha Yakutia has its own regional development program as well. And it also has this aspect of food security. In any case, food security is directly related to traditional lifestyle of indigenous peoples, reindeer herding, fishing, etc., etc. So we believe it is a proper approach. On the one hand, we provide people with everything they need: food, construction materials, other goods. And at the same time, we should also help local economy develop, manufacturing, traditional goods, etc. Last year, in 2021, we launched 2 centers, one in Bela Hora and another one in Ust-Kuiga, 2 very remote places. Bela Gora and Ust-Kuiga are both on remote rivers. And we'll continue this work. This year, we started building 5 more hubs like these. We have a 3-year plan, so in the next 3 years, we are going to build centers like these in all the territories. So we'll have coolers, warehouses, stores, a modern facility. We have over 1 billion rubles from the federal budget to fund this program. And of course, the program is being co-financed by the local authorities. So this year we started building Tiksi, Zhigansky, and 3 more stations in Kolyma: Upper Kolyma, Middle Kolyma, and Lower Kolyma. So construction is in full swing. By the end of next year, we plan to commission these 5 new trade centers. Then we'll use these centers to supply reindeer herders, fishermen with everything they need, and in return, we'll purchase their produce from them. So they will not have to worry about selling their products. There will be trading posts where they can get a very good price for their produce, their fish, the deer meat, etc. And actually, we already have a few first contracts signed that work very well. They purchase reindeer meat, fish, etc. Also, we will use these trading posts and these logistics centers to do initial processing, and then maybe take produce to the local administrative center and do some further processing there. This will help provide local population, like the city of Yakutsk, other places. If you have ever been to Yakutsk, I think you have visited our food market. People really enjoy reindeer meat, fish, berries, etc., etc. So these products are always very popular on the local market. We in Yakutsk, we cannot live without reindeer meat and without venison, without fish. So this will create jobs for people. This will increase their income. Because in the past, we had a very bad situation. Some businessmen would come and they would buy fish and venison real cheap from hunters and fishermen, and then sell it at a much higher price in the city. We'll be able to fix that because these trading posts will use an approach that is much more fair. Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time, so maybe you could give us just some closing remarks. How much time do you have? 3 or 4 minutes more? How much time? I'm almost finished. Are you finished? Yes, I just have a few more comments left. So I told you about our approach, how we support traditional lifestyle, traditional economic activities. First of all, we are very grateful to the federal government for creating this federal program. In the past, we only could rely on our own resources. We had to come up with our own ideas, and those programs were funded from the local regional budget. But now we really see that the federal government is supporting this work, and we do have some practical results, some tangible results. Lastly, I would like to mention the problems that we have. One, land issues. We encountered this problem because there is a contradiction between the federal law. Based on Law 82, people are entitled to free use of land, but there are discrepancies between different laws. On the one hand, the law says that Arctic indigenous peoples can use their lands freely for their traditional economic activities. But then there are a lot of caveats, and as a result of all those caveats, they can't really properly register their rights to certain lands. For example, to be able to use forest territories free of charge, etc., etc. And forests cover a large part of our territory, and it's impossible to establish property rights for a certain part of the forest. You can only lease it. This is the most you can hope for. So our ancestors used to hunt there, used to fish there, and this has always been free of charge. But then at a certain point, the time has come where we have to pay to use our lands. And we have been asking this question. We appeal to lawmakers. We ask, it has always been free. How come we have to pay for it now? All of a sudden, we have to pay for it now. Why? Why? All the laws, they say it should be free. And now, all of a sudden, we cannot use these lands for free unless we have building there. What kind of building can you have in the Arctic territories? This is ridiculous. They say you can only use some property if you have a building there. But for us to keep our deer fed, we need 300 hectares of land per one deer. And this is too expensive for us to pay rent for these lands. So this has been going on for many, many years, and this problem is still unresolved. We think this is a huge problem. This is the cornerstone. If we have property rights to these lands, if we are rightful owners, people will listen to us. Industrial companies will listen to us. They will know that these lands, they belong to us. We are the owners. But at this point, they don't really care. We are not owners. They can come and start developing these lands for their industrial projects. And when we protest, they say, do you have any papers? Do you have any documents showing you are the rightful owner? And of course, we don't have anything. So we need to handle these matters differently. We need a civilized approach. Because when we say we want to be able to use these lands freely, they say, yes, go ahead, use them freely, but you can't establish property rights. Let's say later on, geologists, explorers find some minerals there, and you will have no right. This will no longer be your land, because they will start mining for gold or diamonds or oil or something else. So this is a huge issue, and we do our best to secure property rights for these lands. With some of the tribes, we were able to do that, but at the same time, there are other tribes that failed to establish their property rights, and now they face huge problems in dealing with industrial companies, with the authorities. So this issue of land is the biggest problem. If we resolve this problem, little by little, we'll be able to resolve all the other problems. Thank you. Indeed, the land issue is the cornerstone, the biggest issue. Even Vladimir Lenin said so 100 years ago. But as you know, back in the Soviet days, this was not an issue because all the land belonged to the government. And then when private property was introduced, each tribe had to register its lands. I'm not sure how this works today. I think just recently a new Grigory Latkov told me they adopted a law, I think even today, for indigenous peoples and tribes, access to bio resources, etc., etc. Actually, can you hear me? Am I online?
Я просто сейчас, мне кажется, информационную ленту пришло.
Yeah, I just got the news. Okay, our discussion has reached its conclusion. Usually we present these roundtables as discussions, as a conversation without arguments. It's a discussion club where people can present their views, their opinions, and we can discuss things, and the truth is produced as a result of these discussions. This was the closing session of the Arctic session, the series of roundtables organized by PORA together with the St. Petersburg Journalism Center. Thank you very much for being with us today. And if we ran out of time. In conclusion, I would like to ask Igor Pavlovsky to say a few words. He will give us an overview, not just for our discussion today, but for the entire series. Mr. Pavlovsky, are you ready?
Игорь Анатольевич, не слышу, не вижу.
Спасибо большое.
Здесь, вот.
Thank you very much. Yes, I'm here. I'm ready. Great. I have been here all along. I would like to thank all the participants today. This was the closing session in our series of discussions. The first one was with the Foreign Ministry. And based on every meeting, we prepared a memo that goes to the Gorchikov Foundation and to the Russian Foreign Affairs Ministry, Mr. Korchinov, a special representative for the Arctic. When we started this project, the situation in the world was very different. This was planned as part of Russia's presidency in the Arctic Council. And still, we decided that even though things might change, the Arctic is always there. All the subjects we discussed are still relevant, especially the one we dealt with today. The Arctic would be impossible without indigenous peoples. So, we expected this session to be the closing song in our series. Thank you to all of our participants. Please watch this space because we will continue later this year and next year. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Igor. Thank you to all the participants. It's really great to have different territories, different regions represented here, because it's one thing to have the overall picture, the big picture, sitting here in Moscow, but it's always good to talk to specific territories, to people from local communities. Thank you. I would also like to thank you for organizing this event. It's really great to have a discussion like that. I really wish we could have more time. I would love to talk to Sofya and Antonina and Mikhail. I have a lot of questions, a lot of things I would love to discuss with you. And I still have a lot of questions. So let's have a round table without presentations some other time. Well, we just used the format that we were offered, but we are all for horizontal ties. Like you said, let's stay in touch. Let's talk more. So, best of luck to all of you, and I think Yakutia is a good morning to Yakutia because it's almost morning. Thank you. Bye-bye. Good job. We're going to see each other soon. Sure. Bye-bye.